The restaurant glowed like a secret the city was not meant to see. Soft amber chandeliers spilled light over marble floors and dark wood tables, and every surface reflected wealth that felt old, quiet, and dangerous. This was not a place people wandered into by accident. It was owned by men whose names were never written down, a place where power moved without raising its voice. And yet here she was, standing just inside the doorway, fingers curling around the strap of her borrowed purse as if it might anchor her. Her name was Claire, though most people rarely said it with any emphasis. She was the quieter twin, the one people described as kind, reliable, forgettable. At 30, she had learned to live gently, to take up as little space as possible. Her life was built around early mornings, school lunches, and long shifts at a community clinic where broken systems leaned heavily on her patients. She was a healer, not by title alone, but by instinct. And she was a single mother, though she wore that truth like armor rather than a wound. Luxury had never been part of her world. Her apartment was small, her furniture mismatched, her joy found in simple things like her son's laughter echoing down the hallway. So when her twin sister had pressed a sleek dress into her hands that afternoon and smiled too brightly, Claire's unease had started there. "You deserve one night," her sister had said softly, smoothing the fabric as if performing a kindness. "Just one, let someone else see you." The words had sounded warm, loving, even, and Claire, who had spent her life being told she needed to try harder to be more, had let herself believe it. Now, as she stood in the doorway of the restaurant, that belief began to crack. Every chair seemed occupied by people who knew exactly where they belonged. Men in tailored suits spoke in low voices. Women laughed softly, their jewelry catching the light like quiet signals. Conversations paused just long enough for eyes to flick toward her, assessing, dismissing. Claire smoothed the skirt of her dress and followed the hostess deeper inside, her steps careful, measured. She felt it then, that subtle pressure in the air, not just wealth but authority, the kind that did not need to announce itself. This was not a place for first dates or hopeful beginnings. This was a place where decisions were made that changed lives. Her sister was already there, seated at a nearby table with a group of impeccably dressed friends. She looked radiant, relaxed, entirely at home. When she saw Claire, her smile widened just a fraction too much. She lifted her glass in a small toast, as if congratulating her for arriving on time. Claire's stomach tightened. The hostess pulled out a chair at a table set for two. The seat across from her was empty. "Your guest will be with you shortly," the hostess said, her tone polite but unreadable. Claire sat. The chair felt too large, the table too wide. She placed her hands neatly in her lap, aware of how alone she looked in the open space. From the corner of her eye, she saw her sister lean toward her friends, their heads bending together in shared anticipation. One of them lifted a phone, the screen angled just enough to catch the table where Claire sat. Her pulse quickened. This was supposed to be a blind date, that was what she had been told. A successful man, quiet, serious, someone who admired her work, but no one had said anything about this place. No one had warned her about the audience. A sense of being watched settled over her skin. She told herself she was overthinking, that she was tired, that she could still leave if she needed to. But something held her there, a mix of pride and the memory of her son's hopeful smile when she had kissed him good night and promised to try. Then the room shifted. The conversations softened, chairs stilled. Even the air seemed to tighten as a man walked in. He did not rush, he did not scan the room. He moved with the certainty of someone who never questioned his place in any space he entered. Dark suit, broad shoulders, a face carved into stillness. People made room for him without realizing they were doing it. Claire felt the change before she saw him. He stopped at her table. For a brief moment she considered standing, but her body refused. Instead, she looked up and her breath caught despite herself. This was not a man on a date. This was a man who commanded rooms. He took the seat across from her, his movements controlled, deliberate. His gaze lifted to meet hers, and she felt it like a weight, not cruel, not kind, just assessing. Behind him, her sister's table buzzed with barely contained excitement. Claire's fingers tightened in her lap. Her instincts, honed by years of reading people in moments of pain, whispered a warning. This was not chance. This was not kindness. This was a trap carefully dressed as an opportunity. And as the man across from her finally spoke, his voice low and steady, Claire understood with chilling clarity that she had been placed here for a reason, and it had nothing to do with love. The moment he stepped into the restaurant, the room obeyed him, without being told to do so. Conversations, softened shoulders, straightened laughter lost its edge. It was not fear alone that followed him, but recognition, the kind that comes from knowing a man does not need to raise his voice to end things. He wore black like it belonged to him, not the loud kind of power, but the disciplined kind, the kind that survives storms. His presence pressed against Claire before she even looked up, and when she did, her chest tightened because she understood instantly this was not a man invited for romance. This was a man invited to judge. He stopped at her table, and the silence around them stretched thick and heavy as if the walls themselves were listening. He did not smile, did not offer small talk. He sat across from her, slowly, eyes sharp, steady, unreadable. Claire felt exposed, not because of how he looked at her, but because he saw her. He did not glance at the menu, did not check his phone. He studied her as though her existence required explanation. Around them, her sister shifted with barely hidden excitement, phones, angled whispers ready. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly. The question landed like a blade. It was not curiosity, it was a test. Claire swallowed, her hands were calm in her lap, even though her pulse thundered. She had been asked many things in her life, but never this. She understood the trap in the question. If she said yes, she would look like she chased his name. If she said no, she would look small. She lifted her eyes and answered honestly, "I do not think so. Should I?" A ripple of suppressed laughter came from the nearby table. Her sister leaned forward, covering her mouth, pretending shock while her eyes glittered. Claire did not look at them. She felt the heat of humiliation crawl up her neck, but she did not move. She had survived worse than laughter. She had survived abandonment, grief, nights where her child cried for answers. She did not have this, would not break her. The man across from her leaned back slightly, his gaze sharpened, not with cruelty, but with interest. Something in her answer had shifted the air. He was used to women knowing exactly who he was or pretending they did. Either way, they bent toward him. This one did not. She stayed where she was, spine straight, breath steady. Around them, power pulsed through the room. Men who controlled streets and silence watched from the corners. They recognized their leader. Even if Claire did not, she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the way prey feels the forest go quiet. Her instincts screamed that she was not safe here, not physically perhaps, but socially, emotionally. This place was built to expose weakness. Her sister finally laughed openly, now the sound too loud, too sharp. She spoke to her friends loudly enough for Claire to hear, saying something about innocence, about charity, about how some people just do not belong in rooms like this. Claire flinched, but only inside. Her face remained composed. Her dignity was the one thing she would not surrender. The man across from her turned his head slightly, just enough to silence the laughter. Without a word, his attention returned to Claire, and for the first time his voice carried something unexpected, not warmth, not anger, but curiosity. "You are calm," he said. "Most people are not when they realize where they are." Claire met his gaze again, and this time she did not look away. "I have learned to stay calm," she said softly. Panic never helped anyone. Something shifted behind his eyes, a fracture almost invisible. He had ruled through fear, through loyalty, through blood. Yet calm like this, born from endurance, not arrogance, was rare. He glanced briefly toward the table where the laughter had come from, and then back to her. This was not the woman he had been told to expect. And as the room waited for humiliation to bloom, the man everyone feared realized something quietly dangerous. The joke was already failing. The laughter came again, louder this time, no longer pretending to be polite. It cut through the restaurant like glass scraping stone. Claire felt it strike her back before it reached her ears. She did not turn, but she did not need to. Her sister had always laughed like that when she thought she was winning, when she thought she had finally proven something that lived like poison in her chest. Whispers followed fast, sharp, cruel words dressed as jokes. Claire caught fragments, just enough to understand. Poor thing, wrong table, charity case. The humiliation was no longer subtle, it was being offered to the room as entertainment, and slowly, painfully. The truth settled inside her. This was never a date, this was never kindness, this was a stage, and she was the offering. Her chest tightened, and for a brief moment she imagined standing up, grabbing her bag and leaving. She imagined the relief of the door closing behind her, the cool air outside washing this away. But then another image replaced it, her son at the kitchen table that morning, feet swinging, asking her if the man would be nice, asking her if she would smile tonight. Claire inhaled deeply. She stayed. Across from her, the man watched in silence. He did not interrupt, he did not rescue, he observed. And that hurt almost as much as the laughter. She wondered if this was part of the test too, to see how much humiliation she could swallow before breaking. Her sister finally spoke, her voice loud, sweet, poisonous. I told you she was shy, she said to her friends, pretending concern. Some people just are not made for places like this. She lifted her glass in a mock toast, and the table erupted again. Claire felt something inside her crack, not break, crack, a thin, sharp line, opening where old memories rushed in childhood dinners where her sister shined, and she faded teachers who praised Olivia while forgetting Claire, friends who chose the louder twin, the marriage that failed, because she was always the one holding things together alone. She looked down at the table, at her hands, steady despite the storm inside. I am not small, she told herself quietly, I am just quiet. The man across from her shifted, then not toward her but toward the sound of laughter. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in the table, the phones, the smiles that were too eager, too hungry. When he looked back at Claire, something in his expression had changed. The detachment was gone, replaced by something colder and sharper. They are enjoying this, he said softly. Claire lifted her eyes, surprised by the observation. Yes, she answered. Before she could stop herself, they always do. That honesty landed heavy between them. The room seemed to lean closer, listening. The laughter faltered just slightly, as if sensing a shift. You could leave, he said. You do not owe anyone this. Claire straightened her shoulders. Her voice was quiet but firm. If I leave now, she said, they win. Her sister watched intently, waiting for tears, waiting for collapse, waiting for proof that Claire was exactly what she had always claimed, weak, ordinary, unworthy. But Claire did not give her that gift. She sat with her spine straight and her chin lifted, her dignity wrapped around her like armor. She did not plead, she did not apologize, she did not shrink. For the first time since he sat down, the man allowed himself a small breath. He had seen fear, seen begging, seen ambition. Masked as charm, this was different. This was survival mixed with pride. Around them, the restaurant had grown still. People sensed it, even if they did not understand it. Something was happening, not loud, not violent, but dangerous all the same. The joke was no longer funny. And the woman meant to be broken was still standing. Her sister felt it before she saw it, the shift, the loss of control. The laughter died on her lips, replaced by irritation. She leaned forward, ready to strike again. But before she could, the man across from Claire spoke again, his voice low, calm, carrying weight. This ends now, he said. And for the first time that night, the room understood. The joke had crossed into something else. Something that could not be laughed away. The silence that followed his words felt heavier than the laughter had been. It pressed down on the room, until even the clink of glasses seemed too loud. Claire felt it settle into her bones. She had not expected him to intervene, not like that, not with such certainty. The humiliation had been hers alone to carry, or so she had believed, yet suddenly the weight was shared, and that frightened her more than being mocked. He leaned back slightly, not relaxed, but measured, as if recalculating the entire evening. His eyes no longer drifted toward the watching tables, instead they stayed on her, studying not her dress, not her posture, but something deeper. He was no longer seeing a woman out of place, he was seeing a woman under pressure, and that distinction mattered. Claire could feel the room watching her, waiting for reaction, for gratitude, for embarrassment, for anything that would restore the balance. But she gave them nothing. She kept her hands folded, her shoulders steady, her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She had learned long ago that dignity was not loud, it was stubborn. Her sister shifted in her chair, sensing the loss of momentum. She smiled again, but it was forced. Her friends glanced between the table and the man across from Claire, uncertain now whether they were spectators or witnesses. The phones lowered slightly, the confidence drained from their laughter. "You are not what I was told," he said quietly. Claire met his gaze and for the first time allowed herself to really look at him, not just his power but the restraint behind it, the discipline, the scars hidden beneath the stillness. She did not know his name, did not know his reach, but she knew one thing: this man was used to being obeyed, and yet he was choosing to listen. "People often speak for me," she said softly. "They think they know what I am." He nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. He glanced briefly toward her sister, and then back to Claire. The look he gave the other table was not anger, it was assessment, the kind that decided outcomes without theatrics. Claire sensed that whatever game her sister thought she was playing, it had shifted into territory she did not control. "You stayed," he said. "Most people would have left." Claire hesitated, then answered, "Because I am tired of running." The honesty surprised her as much as it surprised him. She had not planned to say it, but the words felt true. She was tired of being pushed aside, tired of being underestimated, tired of being used as a mirror for someone else's ambition. Something in his expression tightened, a flicker of recognition. Perhaps he too was a man who had learned to endure storms without complaint. Around them the room had fully stilled, conversations died, chairs no longer scraped, the power dynamic had inverted without announcement. The woman meant to be small had not bent, and the man meant to humiliate had not struck. Her sister finally stood, unable to bear the quiet. She laughed again, too loudly, and spoke with exaggerated sweetness, saying this was all a misunderstanding, just a joke, just harmless fun. The word joke hung in the air, heavy and ugly. He did not look at her when he responded. "Some jokes," he said, "are confessions." That sentence landed like thunder without noise. Claire felt it ripple through her chest. Her sister froze, color draining from her face. For the first time that night, uncertainty replaced arrogance. He turned back to Claire, and his voice softened just enough to be dangerous. "You were brought here to be tested," he said, "but not by me." Claire inhaled slowly. She did not yet understand the scope of what was happening, but she understood this. The man across from her was no longer part of the trap. He was watching to see who would be exposed next. The moment arrived without warning, slipping into the room like a breath. No one noticed, until it changed everything. Claire sensed it before she saw it, a shift, softer than power, quieter than tension. Her attention pulled toward the entrance, where a small figure stood, uncertain, fingers curled around the strap of a backpack. Her son had not been part of the plan, he was never supposed to be here. And yet there he was, eyes searching until they found her. Her heart stuttered, fear and relief colliding inside her chest. She rose halfway from her seat, instinct screaming to protect him, to remove him from this place heavy with danger. But before she could move, another child appeared nearby, smaller, quieter, standing close to a man stationed near the wall. The little girl did not speak. She did not fidget. She watched the room with the stillness of someone who had learned silence was safer. The man across from Claire went still, not with alarm, but recognition. His body changed in a way only a parent could notice. His attention snapped away from the power games and landed entirely on the child near the wall, his daughter. Two children in a room built for men who broke things. Fate was rarely kind, but sometimes it was precise. Her son noticed the girl immediately. Children, always did he walk toward her without hesitation, carrying his curiosity like a shield. He spoke easily, words tumbling out with warmth. He told her his name, asked if she liked ships or stories. She did not answer, but she looked at him, and that alone was something. Claire watched frozen. She knew that look. She had seen it in children at the clinic. The ones who had learned that sound led to pain, that silence kept them safe. Something in her softened, something old and instinctive. She stepped closer, kneeling beside them, not forcing, not asking. She took a napkin from the table, folded it slowly, carefully, letting the motion speak. Instead of words, her fingers moved with gentle precision, creating something small and fragile. She placed it in a glass of water and pushed it gently toward the little girl. "It is a boat," she said softly. "It knows how to survive storms." The child stared, then her hand moved just slightly, pushing the paper forward. The glass rippled, the boat floated. The room disappeared. The man across the table felt it like a crack through armor. Years of blood, discipline, control. None of it had reached his daughter like this. Not doctors, not money, not threats, just a woman folding paper with patience. Her sister saw it too and felt panic rise sharp and unexpected. This was not the scene she had planned. This was not humiliation. This was connection, and it terrified her. Her son laughed, delighted, clapping, once pointing at the boat, calling it brave. The little girl hesitated, then smiled. The smile was small, fragile, but real. It landed like thunder. The man stood without thinking, stepping closer, eyes locked on his child, breathing shallow. He had not seen that smile since before the world broke. Claire glanced up and met his gaze. There was no performance in her face, no awareness of the audience, only care, only presence. He understood then with brutal clarity. This woman was not pretending. She did not chase power. She did not fear it either. She simply did what needed to be done. The restaurant was silent now, not the kind forced by fear, but the kind born from witnessing something sacred. Phones, lowered chairs, stilled. Even her sister could not laugh. The joke had collapsed entirely. The man spoke quietly, not to the room, but to Claire. "How did you know?" She shook her head. "I did not, I just listened." That answer struck deeper than any confession. His daughter pushed the boat again, this time more confident. The water rocked, the paper held. Something inside him broke open. Power had failed, violence had failed, control had failed. But kindness had not. And in that moment, every person watching understood the truth, even if they did not yet know the cost. This night was no longer about humiliation. It was about exposure. And the most dangerous man in the room had just found the one thing he could never command: a hope. The room waited as if holding its breath, and in that waiting something dangerous formed, not rage, not violence, but a tension, the kind that sharpened every nerve, the kind that made people aware they were being measured. The man everyone feared stood beside the table, now not looming, not shouting, simply present, and that was enough to tilt the balance of the night. Claire felt it ripple outward. She had spent her life sensing emotional weather, and this was a storm turning direction. Her sister sat frozen, lips parted, smile stranded on her face. Her friends shifted, uncertain hands lowering their phones, as if embarrassed by what they had almost captured. The man spoke, then not loudly, not dramatically. His voice was calm, and because of that it traveled further than any threat. "This was never a joke," he said quietly. "Jokes are meant to end." He let the words settle. He did not look at Claire when he spoke, but the room understood who he was defending. He turned slowly, his gaze moving from table to table. Every eye followed, no one interrupted, no one dared. The power in the room was not his title or his reputation, it was his restraint. "There is a difference," he continued, "between testing strength and feeding cruelty. Tonight someone confused the two. A sharp intake of breath came from Claire's sister table, a chair scraped, someone laughed, nervously trying to restore the old rhythm. It failed. Claire's heart pounded, not with fear now, but with disbelief. She had walked into this place expecting to be broken. Instead, the silence wrapped around her like protection. She did not feel rescued, she felt witnessed. The man finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were clear. "You were invited here to be exposed," he said, "but what has been revealed is not weakness." Her sister stood abruptly, voice rising too fast, too bright. She tried to speak, to laugh, to explain, to paint it all as harmless misunderstanding. But the room no longer leaned toward her, the gravity had shifted. The man raised one hand, not aggressively, simply enough, and the sound died. "Some people," he said, "believe power comes from making others smaller. That is not power, that is insecurity dressed in expensive clothes." The words landed like blows without contact. Claire's sister's face drained color, replaced by something close to panic. The audience that had been hers minutes ago now looked away. He turned his attention back to Claire. "You stayed when you were meant to break," he said softly. "That matters." Claire swallowed, emotion rising like a tide. She did not bow, she did not thank him, she only nodded once, holding herself steady, because dignity had carried her this far, and she would not drop it now. His daughter stood nearby, clutching the paper boat. The man noticed, and something gentler passed across his face. "This," he said, gesturing toward the child, "this is what matters." The restaurant was silent enough to hear breathing. "This ends here," he said finally, "not tomorrow, not later." The meaning was unmistakable. The laughter that had once filled the room felt distant, unreal, like a bad memory, already fading. Claire's sister sank back into her chair, eyes darting, searching for allies, finding none. The man turned back to Claire and lowered his voice. "Just for her, you were never the joke," he said they were. And with that, the night crossed a line it could never return from. Because when the most dangerous man in the room chose to speak with truth instead of threat, everyone understood something irreversible had happened. The humiliation had failed. The power had changed hands. And the story had only just begun. The night did not end with applause or comfort. It ended with silence, the kind that follows exposure, the kind that tells you something has been taken away and will never return. Claire left the restaurant with her son's hand in hers, her step steady, her face calm. But inside her chest everything trembled. She had survived the trap, but survival always came with a cost. She felt eyes on her, even as the doors closed behind her, not mocking now, but calculating. Behind those doors her sister watched her go, and something inside her snapped. Humiliation burned hotter than envy ever had. The laughter she had planned had turned against her, and the power she believed she owned had slipped through her fingers. She did not cry. She did not scream. She smiled, and that smile was dangerous because it meant she had already decided this was not over. The man who had spoken for Claire remained behind, watching the room reset itself. People returned to their conversations, but they were not the same. His presence no longer commanded amusement, it commanded caution. He felt it too, the shift, the ripple of consequences beginning to form. Power never moves alone, it attracts resistance. Later that night, in a quiet, private room away from the restaurant noise, Claire's sister sat across from a man whose loyalty had always been conditional. He was older, sharp-eyed, carrying the bitterness of someone who believed he deserved more than he had been given. She spoke softly, carefully twisting the story, painting Claire not as a victim, but as a manipulator, a woman who had used a child to gain sympathy, who had drawn the attention of a powerful man for her own advantage. She planted doubt like seeds in dry soil. "People like her are dangerous," she said, not loud, not emotional, just precise. "She does not look like a threat until it is too late." The man listened and then nodded slowly, ambition flickering behind his eyes. Doubt was a weapon, and tonight it would be used. The next days unfolded quietly on the surface. Claire returned to her routines, the clinic, the school runs, the small, safe rhythm of her life, but something felt off. The air around her tightened. Whispers followed her in places they had never reached before. Questions came wrapped in politeness. Curiosity, sharpened by suspicion, she felt watched again, but this time from a distance. The man she had met did not come to see her. Not at first. He was fighting his own war, one of loyalty and doubt. His instincts told him she was untouched by deception, but instinct was a luxury men like him rarely trusted. His world ran on proof, and someone was moving pieces against her. Then it happened. A message delivered through intermediaries, quiet, controlled, devastating evidence, had surfaced tying Claire to something she had never seen, never touched. Information that did not belong to her. Name whispered in rooms she had never entered. The trap was no longer social, it was strategic. Security arrived at her workplace with polite expressions and hard eyes. They asked questions, searched belongings, found what had been planted. The look on their faces changed. And in that moment, Claire understood this was not about embarrassment anymore. This was about destruction. She did not beg, she did not shout, she only asked to call her son. When the man heard, his chest tightened. He arrived too late to stop the process, too early to deny the damage. The evidence lay between them, cold, convincing, wrong. He looked at her, searching her face for cracks, for guilt, for fear. He found none, only disappointment. "I will not stay where I am doubted," she said, quietly lifting her chin, and with that she walked away again, not running, not pleading, choosing herself over survival. His daughter clutched the paper boat, watching her leave, and something inside him fractured, but still he hesitated. That hesitation would haunt him. Because the revenge that was meant to erase Claire had only begun. And the storm it would awaken would shake every foundation that power had built. The city did not slow for heartbreak, it never did. Claire felt that truth in the days that followed as she moved through her life like a ghost, doing what needed to be done because stopping was not an option. Her son needed breakfast, homework, hugs before sleep. The clinic needed her steady hands and calm voice, and so she gave what she had left even when her chest felt hollow. The accusations followed her without ever naming her outright. Looks lingered, conversations paused when she entered rooms. People were careful around her, now polite, distant, unsure whether kindness might be mistaken for loyalty to the wrong person. Claire understood this language. She had lived inside it before, when systems failed and blamed the easiest target. She kept her head down and her dignity intact because it was the only thing that could not be taken. At night when her son slept, she allowed herself the truth. She missed the man who had looked at her like she mattered. She missed the way his presence had made the world feel briefly safe, and that frightened her more than the accusations because it meant she had let herself hope. Across the city he stood alone in a quiet room, the paper boat resting in his daughter's small hands. She refused to let it go. Even when she slept, it lay against her chest like a promise. He watched her, breathing slow and steady, and the doubt that had restrained him began to rot from the inside. He replayed the night again and again, the calm in Claire's voice, the absence of fear, the way she had walked away without asking for mercy. Liars begged, she had not. Proof he had demanded, and proof had been delivered, but something about it felt wrong, too clean, too convenient. His world was built on knowing when things did not align, and this did not. He began quietly, no announcements, no threats. He did not ask permission. He pulled footage, records, timelines, conversations that others believed buried. He watched movements around the night of the accusation, patterns forming like scars beneath the surface. And then he saw it. A frame, a shadow, a hand slipping into a bag, while another voice distracted attention. A moment, so small it had been missed by those who were not looking for truth. He slowed it, replayed it, felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Betrayal. Not from Claire, but from those who had smiled the loudest. His jaw tightened, the room felt smaller, the weight of his hesitation pressed down on him, heavier than any enemy he had faced, because this was not a war against rivals, this was a war against his own failure to trust. He thought of Claire walking away with her spine straight, choosing self-respect over survival, and something in him broke open. That night he did not sleep. By morning he moved with purpose, orders, whispered alliances, shifted the underworld, listened, when he spoke now not because of fear but because of inevitability. Claire felt the change before she understood it. Calls went unanswered, doors opened that had been closed, silence followed her again, but this time it was different, not judgmental, not cold, expectant. And then the message came, simple, direct, asking her to come, not demanding, not threatening, only truth. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her first instinct was refusal. She had already walked away twice and survived both times, but her son looked up at her hopeful eyes, asking if everything was okay, and she realized some storms must be faced, not for vindication but for closure. She agreed. The truth was rising. And it would not be gentle. Because when power realizes it has protected the wrong people, it does not whisper apologies. It roars. And the world was about to hear it. The room where truth is revealed is never loud at first. It breathes slowly, heavy with expectation. Men gathered not for celebration, but for reckoning, their faces hard, their loyalty measured in silence. This was not a public place. This was where decisions erased names and rewrote futures. Claire walked in with her head high, her hands steady, her son beside her, because she refused to face lies alone again. Every eye turned not with mockery now, but with calculation, the kind that weighs consequences. Her sister sat among them, dressed perfectly composed, until she saw Claire, and then something flickered, fear buried deep and sharp. She had believed the story was finished, believed the damage was permanent. The man stood at the center, not elevated, not dramatic, simply present, and that presence commanded everything. He did not speak at once. He waited until the room settled, until impatience curdled into unease. Then he began. He spoke of loyalty and how easily it is mistaken for obedience. He spoke of power and how often it hides behind cruelty. He spoke of evidence and how dangerous it becomes when it is planted rather than earned. Screens came alive, images rolling slowly, unmistakable, a hand slipping into a bag, a face turning away, a timestamp aligning perfectly with the accusation. Gasps moved through the room like a wave, the truth no longer whispered but undeniable. Claire's sister rose too quickly, her voice rushed, words spilling out explanations, excuses, misunderstandings, but the room no longer belonged to her. The narrative she had built collapsed under its own weight. This ends now, the man said, not raising his voice, and the words carried further than any threat ever could. He turned to Claire, and for the first time his voice shifted, not commanding, not cold, but human. I doubted you, he said, and that doubt nearly cost me everything. She met his gaze and did not soften, not yet. She had paid too much to do that freely. His daughter stepped forward, clutching the paper boat, her small hand trembling. She looked at Claire, then at the room, and for a moment silence threatened to crush her, but then she spoke 3 words, fragile and powerful. She helped me. The room broke. Men who had seen violence flinch, men who had ordered destruction lowered their eyes. The truth had arrived not through force but through innocence. The man placed a hand on Claire's shoulder, not claiming, not controlling, acknowledging. He faced the room again and spoke clearly. She was never the liability, she was the measure of what we forgot. Security moved swiftly, escorting her sister away. Protests ignored, power stripped in seconds. The silence left behind was heavy but clean. Claire felt her breath shake as years of being unseen cracked open. She did not smile, she did not celebrate, she simply stood present in her truth. The man turned to her once more. I will not ask you to stay where you were harmed, he said, but if you choose to stand beside me, it will be as an equal. She looked at her son, then at the little girl holding the boat, then back at the man who had learned too late but not too late. She nodded once. And in that room where lies had been crafted and loyalty bought, something irreversible happened. Power bowed to truth. And the joke that had been meant to destroy her became the moment everything changed. The world did not transform overnight. Power never releases its grip that easily, but something fundamental shifted, and everyone felt it. Claire walked out of that room into night air that felt lighter than it had in years, not because she had won, but because she had survived without losing herself. Her son held her hand, his grip warm, certain, and she realized that everything she had protected her in return. The man walked beside her, not close, not distant, matching her pace for the first time, not leading, not testing, simply walking. He did not speak immediately, because some moments require space, not words. His daughter followed, clutching the paper boat, still guarding it like a treasure. She glanced up at Claire and smiled again, and this time the smile did not fade. In the days that followed, the underworld adjusted as it always did, but with a new order. Cruelty lost its currency. Fear was no longer the language that ruled rooms. The man dismantled alliances that thrived on humiliation and replaced them with discipline, restraint, and consequence. Those who laughed that night disappeared from tables, and influence dissolved quietly. Claire returned to her life, but it was no longer small. She reopened the clinic doors with renewed purpose. Funding arrived without strings attached. Systems began to heal. Children who had learned silence watched adults choose gentleness, and something changed inside them. Hope spread quietly the way it always does. The man did not rush her. He did not claim her with gestures or promises. He came when invited, left when asked, listened more than he spoke. He learned her rhythms, her silences, the weight she carried without complaint, and she watched him learn how to sit with vulnerability, without armor, without control. One evening, as rain pressed softly against windows, he stood in her doorway, not demanding entry, only waiting, and she let him in because trust is not built through grand acts, but through consistency. He spoke of regret, not to excuse himself, but to own it. He spoke of fear, of losing again, of not trusting himself to choose right, and she listened, because she knew that fear intimately. Their children found each other easily, laughter-filling rooms that had once held tension. The paper boat rested on a shelf, now a reminder not of survival, but of beginning. When the man finally asked, not for permission, but for partnership, she did not answer quickly. She had learned the cost of haste, but when she did, her voice was steady, yes. The underworld witnessed something rare, a union not born of power, but of principle. A woman who could not be broken standing beside a man who chose restraint over dominance. Their presence together shifted rooms without threats. The wedding was quiet, no spectacle, no performance, just truth. Children laughing, vows spoken softly, hands held firmly. No audience that needed convincing, only lives that needed honoring. Claire looked back once at the path that began with laughter meant to destroy her, and felt no bitterness, only clarity. Humiliation had not been the end, it had been the invitation to step fully into herself. As night settled and stars cut through dark sky, she rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath, and understood something deeply simple. She had never been the joke. She had been the mirror. And the man who once asked, "Do you know who I am?" had learned the only answer that mattered. I am the one who chose to see you.